Hey everybody, David and Ricky here. We wanted to hit you up again with some information to have consistent quality conversations with your kids. And today we want to talk about boundaries and get into more specifically dating boundaries. But I want to ask you, Ricky, when you hear the word boundaries, what do you think?
Boundaries are scary. And I know, as just in general, I still don't like boundaries. It's hard to deal with them. It's hard to know that hey, you could only go to this point. I'm a person that likes to create my own rules. And so to know that I can only get to a certain point, I'm like, it's hard. It's hard.
Nobody likes being told what they can't do.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody. And some people more than others. But in general, I don't think anybody likes being told, don't do this, don't do that. But more often than not, that's how, as parents, we find we're talking to our kids, right? About things like drugs, alcohol, sex, right? So dating, don't do this. Make sure you don't. You better not, those kinds of things. But it's really important that we reframe the way we look at boundaries, because boundaries are good for us.
Oh, yeah.
They're healthy, and the right boundaries are actually freeing. They can give us a greater sense of freedom than if we're just living without any sense of any kind of boundaries. So let's talk about that a little more. So, for example, fire. Fire is a good thing in its proper place. So fire in a fireplace keeps us warm. That's great. Fire in a stove or an oven cooks our food. Fire in a lamp gives us light. Fire in our attic burns our house down. And that's not good. So fire in its proper place, fire within the proper boundaries is a good thing. And the same thing, the reason why we have any kind of boundaries around something like a dating relationship is because, in particular, when we talk about something like sex with our kids, we want to encourage them to delay sex as long as possible. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's the healthiest way. But really, the safest place for something like sex is marriage. So when we talk about boundaries, a lot of times I think our kids might have at least a sense of what some good physical boundaries in a relationship should be. So what are some good physical boundaries that you can think of?
Ooh, some good physical boundaries with the kids. And I think the first idea is to see what do our kids think are boundaries, right? Especially in the physical sense. Like, what is a boundary that they'll have right now already without you even having to tell them? Because every kid's going to have that. Everyone, no matter if we like boundaries or not, we set boundaries in our own minds, right? In all these different areas. And I think physical boundaries from the very beginning is great to set it in a relationship, because if not, then there's always a confusion, right? There's always confusion around, okay, what is okay, what's not okay? Can we kiss? Can we French kiss? Can we hold hands? Where does that go, and how far can we go? Without those good boundaries, and one person will set boundaries for themselves, and the other person might set a different set of boundaries, which can cause a lot of tension within a relationship.
Really important. And if we never talk with our kids about this, the chances of them having this conversation with somebody they're dating, somebody they really like, that is not very likely, or at least a good conversation with it. And we're not going to tell you again what those boundaries should be. I've heard parents say no touching where bathing suit areas, that kind of stuff. But really, that's between you and your family, whether it's all the way at holding hands, all the way to kissing. So either way, we want to talk through these boundaries with our kids, and as with everything, explain our why behind it.
And I think along with the physical boundaries, when do we spend time together? So do we spend time alone together? Is there any time that's appropriate to spend alone together? Is it in a group setting? Is it in our house? Is it out in the public? What does that look like? That's a great conversation to have as well.
That's right. When and where we're alone together, those things absolutely apply to those boundaries, because the opportunity to cross those boundaries is going to make it more likely for it to happen. So, one thing when we think about boundaries, I think mostly we focus on the physical. And that's not wrong, but God made us as whole people. We have a spirit, we have our emotions, and really we need to address those in all of our boundaries as well. So for something like emotional boundaries in a dating relationship, you can't share your deepest, darkest secrets with the person you're dating, right? With two teenagers, and it's so easy to. You like them so much. You want to connect on a deeper level, so you share all your deepest, darkest secrets, all your biggest failures, your biggest dreams. And again, while in and of itself it's not morally wrong, anything like that, it creates really deep bonds between you and that person. Some people call them soul ties, and when those soul ties get deep enough, and there's so many of them, it makes it nearly impossible to stick to your physical boundaries, because you just want to be closer and closer and closer. And physical closeness and leading to sex eventually is natural. It's how God designed us to. That's the natural flow of a relationship.
Yeah, and I think a good thing with emotions as well is every kid that we're going to meet, and all of our kids all have different kinds of emotions as well, and they also tap into those emotions in different ways. And so while one kid might feel really connected to who they're dating to, the other person might not feel that same way, but they might not even realize it if emotions aren't talked about in just a very open and honest way. And one way for our kids to learn how to do that with someone they're dating is by us doing that with our kids, being very honest in how we feel. The way that I talk to my kids and the way that my emotions are expressed to my kids are much different than my wife's. My wife's she's gonna express her emotions in a much different way with my kids than I will.
Well, you bring up a good point, talking about the differences between you and your wife. Even the way you express your emotions to your wife, right, are different than how you express them to your kids. Yep. Because that connection is more appropriate. There's a level of sharing that's more appropriate in that marriage relationship than it is with any other relationship in your life. Yeah. So what do you think are some ways we can apply this to something like spiritual boundaries?
Spiritual boundaries are honestly probably one of the most important. Really spiritually, how we're approaching a relationship, not understanding what the other person feels, just about the idea of God. How do they worship? Where do they worship? What does that look like at home? What does their prayer life look like? What is their how do they read the Bible? Do they read the Bible? Because if somebody has a completely different view spiritually than you do, once you begin to create those emotional ties, and all of a sudden you realize that your spiritual life is completely opposite, there's going to be a lot of tension and a lot of hurt that can come from that, for sure.
Another thing that could come from that is the desire to have a Bible study together with each other and get on the same page spiritually, that kind of stuff, which again, on the surface might seem like a very good thing to do. Obviously, we want to encourage our children to seek God and enrich their spiritual lives. But the risk of doing that one-on-one with a person you're in a relationship with is, again, creating those deep soul ties that if it doesn't end up working out, they're that much harder to take apart, and you might invest more into them. You might think there's more there than there is because we're spiritually on the same page. We're trying to get there. And really, if you want to do maybe a group Bible study with a lot of friends that you happen to be in the same one with, that you're dating somebody, that's a little more appropriate. Or maybe I go do one with her family. She does one with my family. That's a little bit different, but we really want to have a healthy understanding of a part-time and together time. And we need to talk about these with the kids. The more comfortable we show them we're comfortable talking about it, the more comfortable they will be talking about it with somebody that they're dating.
When our kids begin to make physical connections, emotional connections, and spiritual connections, they're not always mature enough to be able to see how those connections are being made.
It can affect us for years or even for the rest of our lives. So although we don't want to live in bubbles, we don't want to live in fear of opening ourselves up to other people, we want to do it in a really wise, well-informed, well thought out and discussed way as families. Once we're in that marriage relationship, we are absolutely free to be physical with each other without worrying about what those consequences might come of that. All right. So obviously, having sex with your spouse is appropriate, and you're not as scared of some things like STDs or pregnancies because you're in that committed long-term relationship. Again, we don't want to tell you what boundaries to have. We don't want to tell you to put strict walls around your kid because they will always want to break out of that.
We have to remember those boundaries will get crossed at times. Our kids will cross them because we just naturally feel the need to do that. And so our kids will do that. So be ready to have those conversations about why they cross those boundaries, and then what does those consequences look like when those boundaries are crossed.
That's right.
Our kids need that, and they want that. They honestly do. We as people want that as well. Even though we might not like having boundaries, we do need them, and we like the consequences that come with them because it helps us to really stay in line and live healthy lives.
But we want to let them have a healthy understanding of why boundaries are good, which again, we might have to come around to that way of thinking ourselves. We have to think of boundaries as good, model good boundaries, and then help our kids understand that boundaries are good, healthy, helpful, and more freeing ultimately. Thank you so much.